Now, toward the end of this meeting, the Ukrainians raised their ongoing desire for an Oval Office meeting. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what happened after they did that?
Well, I listened very carefully to Ambassador Sondland's testimony yesterday, so I want to actually point out something where I think it's easy to explain why he had a different interpretation of how this came into being. The meeting had initially been scheduled for about 45 minutes to an hour, and it was definitely in the wrap-up phase of the meeting when this occurred. We'd gone through a series of discussions. Alexander Danylyuk, who was at this point the designated National Security Advisor of Ukraine, really wanted to get into the weeds of how you might reform a National Security Council. He talked to me about this prior to the meeting, and he was hoping to have this opportunity with the National Security Advisor of the United States to get his first-hand opinions and thoughts on what might happen. We'd also wanted to go through a discussion about how important it was for Ukraine to get its energy sector reform underway. And clearly, Secretary Perry had some talking points to this. This is an issue that Ambassador Bolton was also interested in. And then we knew that the Ukrainians would have on their agenda, inevitably, the question about a meeting. And so, as we get through the main discussion, we're going into that wrap-up phase. The Ukrainians, Mr. Danylyuk, starts to ask about a White House meeting, and Ambassador Bolton was trying to parry this back. Although he's the National Security Advisor, he's not in charge of scheduling the meeting. We have input recommending the meetings, and this goes through a whole process. So it's not Ambassador Bolton's role to start pulling out the schedule and start saying, right, well, we're going to look and see if this Tuesday in this month is going to work with this. And he does not, as a matter of course, like to discuss the details of these meetings. He likes to leave them to the appropriate staff for this. So this was already going to be an uncomfortable issue. And as Ambassador Bolton was trying to move that part of the discussion away, I think he was going to try to deflect it onto another wrap-up topic, Ambassador Sondland leaned in basically to say, well, we have an agreement that there will be a meeting if specific investigations are put underway. And that's when I saw Ambassador Bolton stiffen. I was sitting behind him in the chair, and I saw him sit back slightly like this. He'd been more moving forward like I am to the table. And for me, that was an unmistakable body language, and it caught my attention. And then he looked up to the clock and, at his watch, or towards his wrist in any case. Again, I was sitting behind him, and basically he said, well, it's been really great to see you. I'm afraid I've got another meeting.
And did Ambassador Sondland say who his agreement on this White House meeting was with?
In that particular juncture, I don't believe so. It was later, which I'm sure you'll want to talk about, that he did say more specifically.
And what did he say later?
Later, he said that he had an agreement with Chief of Staff Mulvaney that in return for investigations, this meeting would get scheduled.
And was he specific at that point later about the investigations that he was referring to?
He said the investigations in Burisma.
Now, did you have a conversation with Ambassador Bolton after the subsequent meeting with Ambassador Sondland?
I had a discussion with Ambassador Bolton both after the meeting in his office, a very brief one, and then one immediately afterwards, the subsequent meeting.
So the subsequent meeting, or after both meetings, when you spoke to him and relayed to him what Ambassador Sondland said, what did Ambassador Bolton say to you?
Well, I just want to highlight, first of all, that Ambassador Bolton wanted me to hold back in the room immediately after the meeting. Again, I was sitting on the sofa with a colleague.
Right, but just in that second meeting, what did he say?
Yes, but he was making a very strong point that he wanted to know exactly what was being said. And when I came back and related to him, he had some very specific instruction for me. And I'm presuming that that's
what was that specific instruction?
The specific instruction was that I had to go to the lawyers, to John Eisenberg, our senior counsel for the National Security Council, to basically say, you tell Eisenberg, Ambassador Bolton told me, that I am not part of this whatever drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland are cooking up.
What did you understand him to mean by the drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland were cooking up?
I took it to mean investigations for a meeting.
Did you go speak to the lawyers?
I certainly did.
You relayed everything that you just told us and
I relayed
more?
it precisely, and then the details of how the meeting had unfolded as well, which I gave a full description of this in my October 14 deposition.